Hi friends, it's Peggy Noe from PrettyPaperCards.com. I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator. Welcome to my series on the basics of card making. This is a series of videos that will show you how to get started in card making and what tools you need to get started. Now, the secret to card making, as with anything, is having the right tools, and I'm going to show that to you as we go along. And this is the first video in the series. So to begin, we have to begin at the beginning. The beginning of any card is the card base. Now, what is a card base? A card base is what the card is built on. This is a card base right here. This would be the beginning of a card. So I'm going to turn you down and give you a little view of what tools are needed and how to create a card base. Okay, hold on one moment and we'll just get that ready. There we go. So this is a card base, as I showed you right here. This is how you build your card. Now let's look at a card. Here is a very simple card right here. This just has stamping on the front, that's it. It opens and you would write whatever you want on the inside. This is what would be called a simple card, but it still began with a card base. Then you can go all the way up to a layered card, and this would be called a layered card. It has a layer of colored paper, a square layer, it has stamping, it has cut out words, it has a label, and it has little embellishments. But this card still began with the same card base, right? So let's see how you make that card base. That's the all-important thing. Now, the tools to make a card base: you need cardstock, you need a paper trimmer, and you need a bone folder. And I'll show you why, and I'll show you how to use all three of these items. Now, I prefer Stampin' Up Cardstock. I like the quality. I use a lot of white, the basic white. This is the basic white color, and it's 8.5 by 11. This is what I use all the time. You can use other colors of cardstock to make your card base, but the majority of the time I use 8.5 by 11 basic white cardstock from Stampin' Up. It comes in a package of 40 sheets, and I'm going to take out one piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. Stampin' Up has the basic cardstock, and they also have the thick cardstock. I use just the standard cardstock. Now, in order to cut this into our card base, we need something to cut the paper, and I prefer the paper trimmer. There are lots of paper trimmers on the market, but for a beginner, you don't need anything fancy, and this will do everything you need. And I've been making cards, I'm on my 10th year now, and this works just fine for me. So this particular paper trimmer has two blades. It has an embossing blade, and I'll show you what that does, and it has a cutting blade. The cutting blade is darker. It has your measurements, and it also extends. It has an arm that extends with the measurements if you're cutting a bigger piece. So let's start with our 8.5 by 11 piece of basic white cardstock. And this piece will actually make two different cards. Each card is going to be 5.5 inches wide. So you've got your 11-inch piece, dividing it in half. You want to cut it at 5.5 inches. So we're going to put it on the paper trimmer, and here are all of our wonderful measurements. We're going to put it at 5.5 inches. Put this little arm down and slide up our cutting blade just like that. And now we've cut our paper into two pieces. So we have two card bases already. Quick and easy, right? Now, the one thing we'll want to do is to make our card, we're going to want to fold it in half. And in order to do that neatly, we're going to score it. So I'm going to pull down the cutting blade, leaving actually it's called the scoring blade. I forgot. It's called, I was using the word embossing blade, and it does kind of emboss the paper, it does both, but it's actually called the scoring blade. So now I want to score this piece in half. So now the piece I have is 5.5 by 8.5. And I'm going to want to score that in half, and half of 8.5 is 4.25. So I'm going to put this in here at 4.25, and I'm going to push my scoring blade up, and just do that a couple times because it doesn't cut, it puts a mark in there, a score mark. And can you see that scoring mark? I'm going to try to get it so the shadows are off of it. That is your scoring mark. So that shows us where to fold, and it helps the paper to fold easily in that place. So now I'm going to put my paper trimmer away. I didn't need to pull out the arm for this, but I did just to show it to you. So now we have our cut and scored piece of basic white cardstock. Now I'm going to fold it on the scored line. Now when you score, it creates a divot, okay, that goes down. And on the other side, it kind of pokes up a little bit. And we call that a valley. That's a valley that goes down, and a mountain on the other side. It doesn't really matter where you fold it, but I prefer to have the valley be on the outside. So I begin to fold my card. I put the edges together as best I can and hold them, and I take my bone folder and I fold that card right on that score line. And I go over it a couple times, and that makes a very nice fold. And look what we have, a card base. Now you can create a card that faces portrait with this card base, or in the landscape position, and opens this way. This is the kind of card base you're going to be using, I would say 90% of the time. But I also have another type of card base that you can make out of the same 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock. So let's start again, and we'll look at one more type of card base. So we'll get back out our package of basic white cardstock. We're going to take another piece of 8.5 by 11, and I'm going to put my scoring blade up at the top of my paper trimmer because I don't need it for the cutting part. And this type of card base, I'm going to cut down the center lengthwise. So I'm going to put my cardstock in at 4.25 inches, which we already saw was half of 8.5. And I'm going to cut up the center of that piece. And now I'm left with this type of a card base. And let's see, we're going to want to score now on 5.5. So I'm going to put it in at 5.5, pull my cutting blade down, and use my scoring blade and score that just like that. Now we'll set our paper trimmer aside, we'll get out our bone folder again, and this card is different because it's going to fold this way. Again with my valley at the top, but if you do it the other way, it's not a big deal. It really doesn't matter. Put my edges together like that, and they actually call this burnishing with your bone folder. And there now I have 2 types of cards, actually 3 or 4. So this, I could make a card that opens like this. I could make a card that opens like this. And with this card base, I can make a card that opens like this, or one that opens like this. So you now have card bases, and this will suit you well for 90% of the cards that you will make, especially if you're beginning. This is what you need to know, and this is how you make a card base, and then everything else goes on top of this, and we're going to talk about that in future videos. But for now, you've learned how to make a card base. And the tools you used were the basic white cardstock, which will serve you with all different colors you want to use, your paper trimmer, and your bone folder. And I'm going to put links to my online store so that you can order the paper trimmer, the bone folder, and the cardstock from my online store, and you'll be ready to make all of your own cards. And now you know how to make the card bases. Okay, I'm going to come up. I think this is very helpful, especially if no one ever taught you how to make card bases. When you use the right tools, you begin in the right way, and then you can create very beautiful cards, which is what I want you to do. Thank you so much for watching this #1 in my series of the basics of card making. I hope you'll come back often as I create new videos for you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.